So the first thing we're going to do with regards to the triangle is just a sort of solo type of drill so we can understand the shapes we're trying to make when we do a triangle. Okay, when I talk about a triangle today, I'm referring to variations of a front triangle. Okay, so that's usually a triangle done from guard with the intention of creating a submission through the strangle. Now, straight away, there's kind of two types of triangles that we should be familiar with. One of them I call a frame triangle, and one of them I call a folding triangle. Okay, and we'll see why those might be useful as we go forward. But in either case, when you do a triangle, one of the things that you're going to have to do is, if you see my legs are situated right now like I'm in a seated guard, I'm just going to go and put my other knee down on the floor like this. Okay, I've done this in previous lessons, but in this kind of position, where my hip is turned to my left, I'm creating sort of 90 degrees with my right leg and 90 degrees with my left. I've got my left hand here on the floor, and I'm allowing my body to turn towards that support hand. All I do for this movement is to go from left hand on the ground to right hand on the ground and let my eyes and legs follow the movement. So we have a movement more or less like this. Okay, this is a nice easy warm-up, a hip turnover like this, where I'm just letting the knee and arch of the foot come together. And each time I switch, I create a new support hand. And then periodically, every once in a while, we'll just go around and lock up a triangle with the legs. Okay, and I'll come back to why we might do that in a couple repetitions. Here, lock, hip turnover, lock. And so what we start to see is, when I do this type of movement and I lock my legs in a position like this, I've got a very flattened out triangle. Okay, so if I were to lie down from a position like this, my legs are twisted out to the side. Let me make this here. My legs are twisting out to the side here, as opposed to this, where my strangle leg and my support leg are essentially crossing each other perpendicularly. This is a really common way to do a triangle like this. It's not entirely wrong by any means, but it's preferable to get into the habit of twisting the legs out to the side. You could think of it like I'm trying to line up my calves in the same direction. Okay, so if I sit up from here, there's that folded up position with the legs. If I lie back down, and there it is in the shape of a triangle. If I do this, where my support leg is crossing against my strangle leg, and I even try to sit up, I would stop myself dead in my tracks. Okay, so why is this important? Well, this is sort of a fail-safe way to get the shape of the legs organized just by yourself. This is what you want to be doing. Okay, when you're sparring, you're doing your adjustments, you're going from trap triangle to finish, you're seeking out this kind of shape. So if in the movements with your partner you happen to be like this, you should want to convert it to this, where you're letting your legs twist out to the side. Now, when I do that by itself, it feels a bit odd for me because I'm essentially doing it from my hips down. I'm curling my body out to the side, but my upper body hasn't really moved at all. But when you start using your scoop grip here, it will actually help make this lower body positioning easier by way of the upper body. So my scoop grip puts me into a position where my legs are easier to put into the correct shape. Okay, so by using this sort of hip turnover position where we lock the legs, we gain a familiarity with this idea of the triangle being sort of flattened out in an ideal circumstance. Then we take that sensation, we convert it down to guard, and we go from maybe positions like this, where the legs were crossing perpendicular, to positions like this, where they're twisting out to the side. Okay, now that's going to be one of the things that is true for all your front triangles, whether they're frame triangles or folding triangles. Okay, so just a quick introduction to that. Now, what's the difference between a folding triangle and a frame triangle? I would say that most people, most of the time, learn a frame triangle first, and then as their training partners get more sophisticated, a folding triangle sort of becomes more appropriate for the resistances that you encounter. The big split between them is where do you allow for your knees to go in relation to your hip. Okay, so just again as a demonstration here, right now my knees are more or less directly over my hips. Okay, any position where I'm doing a triangle and my knees stay over my hips, this would be a frame triangle. The purpose of a frame triangle is to minimize the amount of stacking pressure that the other person can put on you. If my knees go towards my chest in a triangle like this, it's not necessarily wrong. Let me just change the angle a little bit. It's not necessarily wrong to have my knees go in front of my chest like this, but if it's happening on their terms and not because of something I wanted, that my knees are coming to my chest, this can present some problems. It can be somewhat uncomfortable to do, and it can lead to the triangle coming apart. A frame triangle is one where you maintain your knees over your hips. Sometimes that will be directly by self-framing against your own leg as somebody goes to stack you. Other times the person will start stacking you and you will frame on them, scoot yourself back, and maintain this knees over hips position. Okay, so that would be a frame triangle, one where you're using a triangle, but the idea is that the triangle is also serving partially as a frame to keep the other person away from you, to prevent them from putting you into stacks or other positions where maybe you're not as comfortable dealing with their pressure, and things can go wrong if you're not accustomed to that. Now on the other side of that is a folding triangle, where I allow my body to fold up onto itself, and I essentially absorb their stacking pressure, and I use that to align my body in a slightly different way, which lets the strangle continue. And then the person who was trying to escape, they're doing this stack, and all of a sudden the triangle is still working. Okay, so in those kinds of cases, we might have our leg position like this, frame triangle, my knees are over my hips, and I'm doing things to keep that type of alignment. In a folding triangle, my knees might go completely towards my head like this, and I might still finish the triangle, no problem. We'll see that one a little more clearly when I bring Emmy in and demonstrate it. But front triangles, where you are facing the other person, done from guard, are probably the most common form of triangle. You talk to somebody about triangles, you know, you're trying to make small talk at the grocery store, so you start talking about triangles. That's how small talk works. And you start talking about the difference between frame triangles and folding triangles. And after they give you that initial odd look, you can say to them, well, a frame triangle you use to keep stacking pressure off of you. But a folding triangle you use to absorb stacking pressure, so it's no longer working against you, it's working against the other person. And they both have their place. All of your conversations about triangles probably are in regards to front triangles, where you are facing the other person. Just for completeness, remember there are triangles that you can do when you're on someone's back. There are triangles you can do when you're mounted on top of the person. That's another type of front triangle. There are triangles you can do from side control. When you have someone in a kimura, you can put them in a side triangle. Those are all great, but we're not going to get into them today. So let's look at, again, just this difference between a front triangle with a frame and a folding triangle, so you can see what the difference is, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how to do them and how they might work. So let's just say that Em's underneath here, and let's say that one way or another I'm able to get into a trap triangle, where, just a moment, where I've got her elbow and shoulder and her head locked inside of my legs, and one of her arms is excluded. In this position, I'm in a frame triangle because my knees are over my hips. If I pulled my knees in, I'm actually compromising that frame, meaning that if I pull my knees in and Emmy starts to stack me going head over head with me, like this, it may be hard for me to actually finish if I'm unsure of how to deal with this forward stacking pressure. So a frame triangle, I might insist on keeping her back in some way. If that should fail, where I was framing against my own legs and she was stacking me, I might put my hands, keep going, towards her knees like this, so that if she tries to go head over head with me, I'm actually keeping her away using these V-shaped frames down here at her knees. Okay, so here we are, we have a trap triangle, and right now it's a frame variation where I can keep her away using my legs. Now let's say that she does get head over head with me, and I was late to framing on myself, I was late to framing on her. It's not the end of the world. I can actually let my body fold up and still get a great triangle going from here. The thing that's going to unify a frame triangle and a folding triangle is to put the lock of your triangle, regardless of type, to always put that lock directly on the back of the head. Now, in order to do that from this stacked position, I had to move my body out to the side and allow my knee to drop under her neck, and then I would be fine to finish a triangle from here. Let's come back. So, again, I'm going to reiterate this a couple of times, but if we're trying to distinguish two types of front triangle, we have a frame triangle on the one hand, and we have a folding triangle on the other. A frame triangle is probably the better one to start with as a beginner because it trains you to use your legs to keep the person at some sort of distance from you. Okay, because my knees have not passed my hip line, it's a lot easier for me to keep the person away with pushing with my legs, or framing against my own legs, or framing against their body. As you get more comfortable with the triangle itself and the person starts stacking you, posturing, and trying to use multiple different defenses to get out of a triangle, then the folding triangle becomes a lot more realistic because it just takes one of their defenses, flips it around, and makes it work against them. Okay, so we've established this idea that there's an ideal sort of shape for a triangle, which is this sort of flattened out position. We've established that within the domain of front triangles, we kind of have two separate branches, a frame and a folding triangle. Most of the things that you need to do when you do a triangle apply to both a front triangle, with whether it's frame or folding. And so we'll move forward with essentially those being the same thing, and I'll point out where small, subtle differences can occur between the two. Okay, so let's take this from a setup that we've been covering so far to get into our trap triangle, talk about some of the things that are going on and some of the problems and adjustments that you'll want to make in order to have a successful finish. Okay, so let's say I'm in a seated guard like this, and Emma's standing up, and she's got her left leg in front, I've got my right leg in front. I'm going to start off at a bit of a distance here. I come with my hand on the floor, and I'm looking for that cross-collar grip. So I go in, I get my grip, we do our push-pull, I hook into the legs, and now I go ahead and I grab a hold of her ankle. I put a distance foot on her, and maybe she's grabbing onto my pant leg here and my pant leg on the other side. So I've got my left foot as a distance foot on her. I'm going to go ahead and reach up, grab a hold of her sleeve, and then I'm going to put a second distance foot here on her elbow and bicep. Okay, so here's the position we're in. We're just going to turn a little bit so you can see this. And everything's visible more or less. Okay. So I put a right leg distance foot on her, left foot distance foot on her, right hand in lapel, left hand on the sleeve. Now, I've gone over this a little bit before, but it's palm turns up, elbow comes down, thumb tries to go past the ear. Now, once I've got all this in place, because I have my right leg as a distance foot, I can pull with my grip and kick my foot towards my shoulder line to break her grip, and then come back to her hip with my left foot. Now, if I'm not able to break her down and pull my legs up into a triangle, I can push at her knee, off balance her, get her hand to the ground, and then go to the triangle. That will, but since that's sort of in the domain of setups, we'll leave that alone for a moment. We're just assuming that I was able to maintain this type of grip where I'm connected to her, but she has not formed any useful new grip on me. Anytime that's the case, I'm going to pull myself up to her head. I'm going to pull my belt under her armpit and try to get my knees past her ears. Then I circle my legs 1 and 2. Now, once this happens, once my legs connect, I want to have the bend of my knee biting on both sides. Okay, the way you can tell this is happening is my lower back comes up off the floor without the use of my hands. Okay, that raises the height of my knees here. Now, once my knees are up high, I can pull in with 2 legs. Okay, and now I can start going into my finishes and things like this. Now, the reason I stopped right there is because one thing, you know, you can look around for stuff on triangles all day long. There's lots of great stuff to find online. But one thing that tends to frustrate people when they first get into the triangle is there's what you're trying to develop is a skill and sensitivity with your legs to overcoming the other person's upper body. And what tends to sort of get glossed over is what specific part of your leg needs to make contact with what specific part of their body in order to make that happen. When I lock somebody in a trap triangle, somebody can try to slip by sliding backwards and away from me, sort of extracting themselves out of the triangle, or they can try and break the structural sort of integrity of the triangle by going up and posturing. I need to have my leg position set so that it deals with both of those things, no matter how rapidly they switch between them. Okay, so what I recommend is you take your hands and you find the bend of your knee here, and you flex your leg like you're trying to push your foot through the floor and then pull it towards your butt. You'll feel the tendons and ligaments in the back of your knee start to activate and flex. Okay, similar to if you flex your bicep, you can feel one in your elbow. Those tendons and ligaments have a sort of hollow pit between the two of them. Okay, so it's sort of 2 tendons and ligaments like this on either side. and then between the two, there's sort of a pit, a dip, where your hamstring and knee are. You're trying to put as much of their shoulder and neck into that dip as possible, and then bite down and hold it with those tendons and ligaments. Okay, and that's true on both sides. So it's not your calves or your Achilles tendons or anything like that that's going to be doing the work for you. It's not even really your hamstrings that are going to be doing the work for you. They provide the muscular pull and they should be in flush contact. But the thing you need to put attention on, because it will tend to slip away from you if not, is the tendons and ligaments in the back of the knee, and specifically that sort of hollowed pit here in the bend of the knee. Okay? Now, the tricky thing is when my leg is bent like this, I can take my hand and look how it goes to about this height into those tendons and ligaments. If I lengthen my leg out, it goes up higher. Lengthen more, it goes higher still. So to get flush contact with this critical area, it's easier to do when my leg lengthens out like this. Now the big problem is I need to bend my leg and pull them in order to have an effective triangle. So what do we make of all this? There's going to be a moment when you reach up with the triangle where your legs will extend and then bend, and extend and then bend. And you have to understand that the purpose of extending the leg is not to just lengthen and reach and touch them, it's to expose this bend of the knee. And then once it's exposed, to make contact with their neck and shoulder, then immediately close it and pull them in. Okay, so I'm going to do the same movement again, and I'm going to point out what I was just talking about right now. So here we are, we've got our initial stance, we're doing everything the same. Here, got our grip, distance foot, second distance foot, there goes the grip, and now just watch my left leg, then I'll demonstrate the other side. I go up and around, there's my right leg lengthening. Now watch my left leg, it's going to lengthen and then bend, okay? It's bent right now, that's to give me height with my hip. Then it lengthens and connects, okay? That's fine. Now this is the leg that will be more important, which is the leg that goes flush to their neck. Foot on the hip, foot on the bicep, all the grips are the same. We go up with our hip, and now I lengthen my leg to expose the bend of the knee, and I bring it flush to her neck. I do the same thing with the other side and lock. Now my knees are past her ears, and so if she were to posture up and away from me, I can pull in with my legs and I don't lose anything. If I go back a step, and I were to go up and around, and I don't lengthen fully, I try to pull in early, let's say, here. So there's no flush contact. Even if I add my grips and pull with my legs, Em will maybe try to posture up and away, and that may not immediately get her out. But then she'll slide back and away and pull her arm out, and she's gone. Okay? And so there's sort of this exaggerated movement that you should get in the habit of making, which is to maximally extend your legs and reach, and then immediately clamp and break them down and pull them in. Okay? The key element is to get that flush contact with the back of your knee. Aim the back of your knee past their ear, and when you can feel that happen, it's safe to pull them in with your legs. Okay, so let's have a look at that again from this end. So we're here, we go grip, push, pull, hook in, there's our grip, distance foot, second distance foot, I break her grip, I go up with my two knees as high as I can, and I circle my leg so now it's straight, I bite down, I put a second leg on, bite down, and now I pull in with my two legs here. Now at this point, a few things can happen. If Emmy starts stacking towards me, I can use the tactics of a frame triangle and keep my knees over my hip. Or I can grab wrist behind the head or my own shin and create an angle and immediately go towards a finish. Okay? Not super important at the moment. The big idea, this sort of step one, first things first that we have to do is to get in the habit of using extended legs in order to create that contact with the back of the knee, with those tendons and the hollow at the back of your knee, and getting that past your partner's ear. Once that happens, you can connect your legs to each other. Once your legs connect to each other, we're always pulling them in with the legs. Okay? So that would sort of capture the first step of a triangle, which is to threaten the triangle, meaning that right here, there's no threat. I'm facing you, and M is facing me. There's obviously no threat of a triangle. When I'm playing open guard like this, I'm not threatening a triangle. There's the potential of one, but I haven't threatened one yet. The threat of the triangle happens when you have one of their elbows and shoulders and their neck inside of your two legs. Okay, it's just a threat. Once you've got the threat, the big thing to do in the triangle is to lock the figure four. And that's where most of the resistance and most of the problems tend to occur, is going from the threat of a triangle to a locked figure four triangle. And actually, can I have you step over real quick? So just to demonstrate a couple other pieces here. You'll remember that we started with a hip turnover movement like this. And I went and locked up like this. And if you sort of abstract your mind a little bit, you think about cubism or whatever, you could see that this is sort of a four shape. If you were sort of looking down at my legs from the ceiling, that might be how I read a four. Sort of messy and maybe hard to read. But it is where the name figure four comes from, is this shape here. Now, if I convert that back down to the ground, it doesn't look so much like a four anymore. I twist my legs out to the side, it's just a triangle. But it definitely is not a figure four if I'm like this. If I sit up, this is a mutation that is not even close to a four. Figure four means this right here. Okay, so when you're working a triangle and you've threatened it successfully, you're going to the next step, which is to lock the figure four. Okay, and that means going from any sort of connection with your legs, whatever happened to be, any sort of grip, whatever happened to be, any sort of alignment, whatever it happened to be, into a figure four lock. And most of the adjustments, most of the responses that you have to your partner, all of those are interested in helping you form this figure four lock. Okay, so the first step of the triangle is going to be to threaten it. And the second step is going to be to lock a figure four. And it's between steps 1 and 2 that most of the problems occur. So I'm going to run through this again. We're going to threaten the triangle. We're going to get to the trap triangle where we've got one elbow and their neck inside of the legs. And then I'm going to lock the figure four. And then we'll come back and we'll repeat that a couple times, because since most problems occur there, most of the details we need to look at are also going to be somewhat bound up in that area. Okay, so here we are. We've got a left leg in front and my right leg in front. Everything's the same so far. Now we've been looking at the open guard. We create our grips, our distance foot, we break, we set everything in motion, and now I go up and around. I make sure to get that good flush contact, 1 and 2. I've threatened the triangle. Okay, I pull in with my legs so that I can go from the threat of a triangle to a figure four. Now, what's the general order to do here? I recommend going 2, 1 and 1 and 2, meaning 2 wrists behind the head. Then a 1 and 1 where one wrist stays behind the head and one wrist grabs the shin of your strangle leg. And then you keep that while you step on the hip and create an angle until you can lock 2 legs. Okay, and at this stage, the lock should be a figure four, ideally the lock of the triangle on the back of the head. Then we go on to the third step, which would be to create an angle, and then the fourth step, which would be to finish. Okay, so again, we've got position. Open guard, I come in, grip, push, pull, hook into the legs. I create a distance foot, a second distance foot. I break her grip. I'm interested in attacking with a triangle, so to threaten the triangle, I extend my leg to make good contact, extend my leg, and then as soon as my legs are connected, I've created the threat of the triangle, so I pull in with my legs. Now I go 2 wrists behind the head. Then, with the 2 wrists behind the head, I pull my head up towards hers. I go 1 and 1. 1 wrist behind the head, 1 wrist on my own shin. And I use the 1 and 1 so that I can step on her hip and make my adjustments until the lock is behind her head. Then I create an angle off to the side, and from here we can finish. Okay, so the first big thing we did to move from the threat of a triangle to a lock was this sort of quick 3-step process. 2, 1 and 1, 2. That means 2 wrists, 1 and 1, 1 wrist, one behind their head, 1 wrist on your shin, and then 2 again, meaning 2 legs controlling them. So we go 2 false grips behind their head. Okay, and when we do that in a triangle, we want to have 2 wrists behind the head to bring their head down, but also keeping in mind to bring our head up to our own hands. Okay, when you pull down on someone's head, that's one thing. When you pull down on someone's head and you bring your head up to your hands, you make them hold all of this hanging body weight from their neck, and it's very hard for them to resist that for a long period of time. So we have 2 wrists behind the head. Then, once we've got 2 wrists behind the head, we're always going to take our hand and grab our own shin. It's going to be on the same side as the support leg. So you'll remember we've got a strangle leg and then a support leg that goes over the strangle leg. So that means my support arm is on my right side in this scenario. My support arm should always go inside my leg and not outside, because outside limits my ability to adjust my support leg. So we go inside. Then we make our adjustments and we lock with 2 legs. So it's 2 wrists behind the head, 1 stays, and 1 goes to help out so that the support leg can leave, move, and make adjustments. Once that's all done, then we can create an angle, twist everything out to the side, and finish. I said that most of the time, if you're gonna fail at a triangle attempt, it's gonna happen in the stage from trap triangle to locking the figure 4. This is one way of sort of capturing most of the problems with a pretty simple solution. 2 wrists on the head, then the 1 and 1, and then 2 legs to keep control of them. Now there's a couple sort of surrounding details that we should also take a look at. And one of the main issues that people tend to run into is when they make their adjustment with their support leg, they tend to get a little bit maybe confused as to what is sort of safe. What is a safe signal to proceed, and what is when you should not try to make this adjustment. Let me clarify that jumbled mess I just spit out right now and give you something useful. Come over here. Okay, so maybe go down your knees. Let's take this from a trap triangle right about here. So I've got my legs involved, and let's actually turn this to here. And what tends to happen right here, let's say I put 2 wrists behind the head, let's say I grab a hold of my own shin, and let's say I go to make an adjustment. Right now, my knee, and especially my inner thigh, are against Emmy's shoulder, tricep, and elbow, and preventing her from pulling her arm out of here. So let's look at how this could obviously go wrong. I've got my shin, I've got her head, or I've got my wrist on her head. If I go like this, clearly something has gone wrong. Okay, she just pulls her arm out. If I go like this and I put my foot on her hip and my knee flush to her tricep, it's possible for me to keep her contained like this, okay? But I should always have this idea in mind that once my legs are locked, if they're gonna come unlocked, it's because something else has replaced the lock. So right now my knee is over my shin. If I take my hand and my wrist and I grab my shin, I can freely unlock the triangle. Let's actually try it a little more. But what I can't do is unlock the triangle and remove that backstop that was behind her shoulder and elbow, because then her arm is going to come out and I haven't really helped myself at all. So we've got a lock, I go up and I grab my shin. When I unlock, I place my foot, but I keep my knee closing in. So my left knee and my right knee move towards each other like this, okay? Now in this position, I can push off of her hip and adjust the triangle if necessary. Sometimes you're going to have this kind of grip on the shin and on the head, and they're going to be strong, posturing up and away from you and things like this. And so the push on the hip will help maintain good distance from, between the two of you. Let's say they're posturing up, but then they start stacking you head over head. In these cases, you might be interested in an initial lock and then reaching for a scoop, step, 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 strong up, 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 and then going into something like a folding triangle here, and then you can finish, okay? So the first issue we want to be avoiding is if we've got 2 wrists behind the head and then the 1 and 1, is we don't want to do things that take our knee out into the side where their arm is going to come out. Instead, we just unlock, we leave the knee where it was, and we place the foot on the hip. This is why it's almost always wrong to put your foot down on the floor, because putting your foot on the floor almost always requires you move your knee. That's not really what we want. Here, what we want to do is maintain that contact between foot and knee while we make our adjustments. Okay. So the way you know you're doing that wrong, or if you're making the error I just described is if people are constantly pulling out of your triangle. They're able to slip their arm out, they're thumb posting, they're slipping their head out, things like this. As opposed to, say, stacking you and creating problems by stacking you. Now, let's look at another sort of dynamic part of the triangle that I don't often see brought up, but I find extremely, extremely useful. And this is how to correct your leg positioning when you notice things have sort of gone a little bit wrong. Maybe you had good contact with your leg in the back of your knee, but as they're moving, as you're moving, you can feel it start to sliding down a little bit, or maybe one of your legs is going out to the side, and whatever the reason, you just need a way to reassert this good strong bite with your legs. Okay, so what we're going to do is just keep in mind that when we want to make that flush contact, we have to straighten our leg to some degree, reestablish that good contact that we want, and then we can bend the leg again and bring them in. Okay, so let's have a look at it. So if we're in, let's say, a trap triangle type of situation here, and let's say Emmy starts slowly posturing up, and I just have not reacted. Just your head going up. She's feeling your head going up. And my knee starts slipping down like this. Okay, let's go back a little. So once again, we're here. I've got my trap triangle. Emmy has started to posture up, and I run into this kind of problem. So as Emmy is posturing up and away, what I'm going to do is actually use my two wrists to pull her head down. I may not get her head to move at all. She might be strong posturing up and I can't get her head down. I bring my head up, but now I can safely unlock my two legs, straighten them out, and reassert that bite. You'll see that when I do that, my lower back comes off the ground, and I'm looking to get my knees past her ears again. There might be a couple adjustments there, then a relock, and then we pull in with the legs, and then from here, you can go around and make your adjustments. Okay, but the idea is if your knees are dropping down and they're not really in the position you want, it's tough to get them up and around again if your legs stay connected. Okay, what tends to what tends to happen is if my legs are locked like this and my knees are in a poor position, if they stay locked together and I raise them up, watch my knees, they tend to open out to the side here. And that's going to create all kinds of problems where they're slipping out of the triangle, they're going around. So what we want to do instead of keeping the legs locked is to control the person's posture and allow ourselves to unlock so that my knees can stay close as I lift and create a new bite with my legs and then bring them back in. Okay, so the big idea there is if you feel that the knees are slipping down, you don't have that good strong contact that you want, no problem. As long as you have good control of their head with your wrist behind their head, you can unlock your triangle, straighten out your legs, and then bite down a second time to really get a good clamp with your legs, and then proceed forward and finish your triangle. Okay, so up to this point, we've looked at this idea that ideally with a triangle, we want to have this sort of flattened out position. This is where the figure 4 part of the triangle gets its name. And we looked at how we can discover that shape here in this sort of hip turnover position. And what we're always looking to do is to then take any triangle on the ground and convert it into that same shape. We looked at how we could essentially break up front triangles, which are most of the triangles you do from guard. We can break them up into kind of two categories: frame triangles and folding triangles. Frame triangles are when my knee is going to stay more or less over my hip like this. And the benefit of this would be that if the person is trying to crush me, I can frame on myself, I could frame on them, or I could unlock and just go back to playing guard and pushing with my legs. So there's some good points to using a frame triangle. The other type of triangle will be a folding triangle, where my knees are purposefully brought beyond my hip line into positions like this. And in a folding triangle type of situation, what you're usually doing is you're using their forward stacking pressure, or at least their attempts to create forward stacking pressure. You're absorbing that efficiently and converting it into a strangle. Now, if we think about how that would play out, it's sort of like, okay, we've got this idea of a triangle. We want to have a figure 4. I got it. Good, 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 good. All that's the same. Then they sort of split. There's a framed triangle on one hand, there's a folding triangle on the other, and then they converge again, and they become sort of the same thing with this idea of put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. Okay, so I'm I'm always trying to warn you about this idea. Be aware of when techniques split, and now you've got two techniques you have to learn. If one technique was a lot, multiply by 2. If I knew how math worked, I'd assume that's a larger number. That's a lot. So split, we got to converge again. So we've got frame triangle on the one hand, folding triangle on the other. They converge again on this notion of put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. Okay, put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the lock of the triangle is where your knee meets your shin. Okay, where your support knee meets your shin, that's the lock of the triangle. And what do? We put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. Exactly right. And that's how you always unify your triangle. Is this a triangle where I put 2 wrists, 3 wrists behind their head? Does it get you closer to putting the lock of the triangle on the back of the head? If yes, continue. If no, maybe reconsider. Okay? So, again, there are many types of triangles. We've looked at a couple. The end result, the end goal of all these adjustments we make is to put that lock of the triangle on the back of their head. So let's look at a couple sort of odds and ends here. We know what our finish line goal is. It's to put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. And we know what the initial part of the triangle is. You got to create a threat where you've got one of their arms in and their neck and one of them out. And we've seen a couple ins and outs there. But let's look at some other things that can happen. So one is, let's say I'm here with M and I have my trap triangles. Let's actually turn it this way. And I have my trap triangle situated. All right. Now, I was pulling her head down. That was working great for me. But sometimes you'll notice pulling someone's head down does not necessarily stop them from moving their head forward. Okay, and this is what we call stacking or stacking pressure. What's going on when someone stacks you is they're trying to get their head directly over your head. The reason they want to do this is because if they're able to do it, they put you on your cervical spine. And so you're essentially building all of these movements off of a very vulnerable part of your anatomy, which is the very most vulnerable part of your spine, your cervical spine. Let's back up just a hair bit. Let's go back just a hair bit. So if I'm here and I said, hey Em, go ahead and stack me head over head. Now I'm going to make an imaginary line that comes out of the top of my head, and that's about where it is. Right now, I'm fine. Okay, until Em's head touches my hand, I'm fine. Now, you can probably hear a little bit of my voice. There's a little bit of pressure on me. If she goes further than that, she's in danger. She can be rolled over. Okay, so if you imagine a line that comes out of the top of my head, right at that line, that's where Emmy wants to go when she stacks me. She wants to put her head right there. And that puts pressure on me and can make it hard for me to finish the triangle. Before that point, not really a problem. Especially because I can scoot myself back, I can frame on her, I can do all kinds of different things. And in addition, if she goes up to this point where my hand is, if she made the mistake of going further than that, it's pretty easy to roll them over and sweep them into a mounted triangle. Okay, so stacking pressure refers to their head going directly over your head like this. Okay, so what are we going to do about stacking pressure? Well, the first thing you should know is that if you have 2 wrists behind their head and they begin stacking while they're looking at your stomach and they cannot look up to you, they are actually making it easier to do the one thing you want to do with a triangle, which is put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. So if she starts stacking me from here, and I've got her head down, I'm just going to put the lock of the triangle on the back of her head. Amazing. Okay, you see what's going on there. It could be an avenue for her to get out. It's to stack me. But it could be sort of what seals her fate and makes me able to finish the triangle. The key element is my wrists are behind her head and she cannot look up and forward when she stacks me. Why look up and forward? What does that mean? It's because if she cannot look up and forward, she cannot do the second part of the stack that's necessary to get out, which is to posture up and away. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate that real quick and then we'll flip back to me doing the triangle. So let's say Fem's lying down here and let's do this side here. She locks a trap triangle and she keeps me looking down. So she's got wrists on my head and I cannot look up. When I stack, I end up putting myself in a very compromised position. If I can stack and begin looking up and towards her, Then what begins to happen is I can go to the next stage of escaping a triangle, which is to get my head over my hips and start creating a vertical spine here. Now, I'm sort of two minds right now. You're going to learn, you're going to hear about getting out of the triangle. The next step, you push on the hip. Someone with a good triangle is never going to get beaten by my upper body like this. It is almost always going to involve me stepping my leg over in some way to get out. Okay, just think about the mechanics that are happening here. Her legs are fighting my upper body. If we are even close in skill and size, she's going to win 135% of the time. For me to beat her legs, I've got to involve my legs. So stacking and posturing are upper body movements that I make in an attempt to bring my lower body into play to actually break out of the triangle. Okay, this is one of the things that makes the triangle very powerful, is that it requires quite a bit from the other person to get out because their legs are not immediately part of the fight. Okay, so let's look at this again. She's got me trap triangle. I go stacking her, but I don't have the ability to look up and away from her. She moves the lock behind my head, and I tap. Now, she locks the trap triangle again. I start making my way to a position where I can look up and away, so that if I move my head forward, I can also move my head up. As opposed to just forward, I can move my head forward and then up. Now, the problem, this is me posturing. This is another sort of classic recommendation as to how to get out of a triangle. But posturing in and of itself is this. This is not me getting out of a triangle. This is me in a trap triangle but not being finished. Getting out of a triangle almost always involves something where I step on her and break myself free. Right now I'm just using a spider guard grip on this far side to break free of the triangle. Okay. So posturing and stacking are related to each other. Stacking is almost always the first part of posturing. And posturing is almost always the necessary body alignment needed to bring the legs over, which is the actual escape for a triangle. Okay, and I'm talking about two very experienced black belts. Both of them know that one of them likes a triangle and is now caught in a triangle. This is how they're going to get out. Okay, so why do I mention it this way? Because when someone is stacking you, if they are not going to posture, if they're not making attempts to posture, if their follow-ons are not something like posture, then the stacking is working for you. Okay, so if I'm here and I'm working my triangles here, and I know that M likes to do stacks and postures to get out, but I end up bringing her close enough, I've got control of her head, and now she starts stacking me, but she cannot look up and away. If she moves her head over my head, I don't anticipate her posturing. I don't need to worry about that. I just move on with business as usual, and I put the lock behind her head, and I finish. Okay? So, first big issue you run into with triangles, people trying to stack you. What is stacking? Their head goes over your head. Not beyond, that's an overhead sweep. Not before, that's not stacking. You can frame your way out of that. It's when they put their head directly over your head. If they do that, but they're not looking up, go about 2 wrists on the head and continue moving to put the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. And everything's good. Okay? Second big issue, they start stacking you. They start going head over head with you, and they have some capacity to look up. So now they're stacking you with the intention of posturing up and away from you. Okay, and so we need methods to deal with that. And then lastly, at some point later, we'll talk about how to deal with somebody's legs if they do get that far along in their defense of the triangle. Okay, but our first big problem when we go from threatening a triangle to locking the figure 4 was stacking, head over head movements. The second big problem is posturing up and away from you. Now, the thing you want to try and get in the habit of when you go from one problem to another and you're trying to carry some useful tools along the way is what really changes when somebody starts posturing. What is now available that was not available when they were just stacking you? One of the big ones is if somebody's head is moving up and away from you, their legs have to be moving towards you. Okay? It's not possible for me to go into a position where someone's pulling my head down. It's not possible for me to move my head up and away against resistance unless I bring my legs forward in some meaningful way so that I can use my legs to create a base of support and to push the floor so that I can lift my head up. So when someone is stacking you, their head is going to be going forward and you're going to be pulling it down. When they stop going forward and stop stacking you, they're going to posture up. When they go to posture up, their legs will be in range of your upper body grips. And so one of the main things that we're going to do to stop somebody when they go to posture is going to involve controlling their legs, or worst case scenario, controlling their arms. Okay, so let's have a look at how this might play out. So let's go back here. Using a trap triangle, and we've managed to get our knees above their ears. We've managed to make good contact so that we're pulling in with the legs. And now we've managed to get 2 wrists behind the head, and we're controlling their head and their posture from here. Now, if Emmy were to stack me from here, this is not a problem because I prevent her from looking at me or looking up, so I would be able to continue making my adjustments. But let's say that I'm in this position and she starts posturing up and away from me. As she postures up and away, I allow my lower back to come off the ground and I put my elbows on the line of my shoulders here. I don't stay here reaching for her head. Instead, I put my elbows at the line of my shoulders. Can you see that? Yeah. And I use the points of my elbows and shoulders to raise up and ensure that my knees have that strong contact that we started with. Now, if I said, hey, Emmy, can you posture up and away from me? Can you stand up, move around, do all that sort of stuff? And now just be ready, keep going, keep going. Pull in with the legs. It will always bring them down. Now, let's look at a small difference. Emmy goes posturing up and away, but I've got a centimeter or so, pause right there, pause, where my legs drop. I'm going to relock my legs, but my knee has dropped. I do not have flush contact with the back of my knee. Emmy could easily pass this hand through and add it back into the mix. Okay? That's the lack of flush contact. Now when I go to pull in with the legs, she postures up, it breaks the lock of the triangle. Okay? That's the main reason why I bring up gaining the sensitivity in the back of your knees when you do a triangle. Okay, so let's see this one more time. I've got my legs in a decent position here. I've got flush contact with my strangle leg here, and I layer my support leg on top. Now if I said, hey, Em, can you slide that right hand back and through into the mix like we just did a moment ago?
No.
Can you stand up and try? Okay, it's not going to happen. Now I can pull in with the legs, go off to the side, make my adjustments and finish. Okay, so the big takeaway from this portion is there's stacking pressure, which is head over head. There's somebody posturing to move up and away from you. When somebody's moving up and away from you, the thing that will make or break your triangle is, do you have that flush contact with the bend of the knees? If you have that flush contact where you straightened your leg, you got flush contact with the bend of the knee, and then you closed it down, then when you pull them in with your legs, they're going to come down to you, or at the very worst, they're going to be pulled enough that you can reach up and attach to their head. Okay, if you deviate that from a little bit, if they can slide one finger between, then that's not going to happen. Okay, and I'll show you a couple ways you can practice this to make sure that that you're accomplishing this sort of flush contact. But when someone postures up and away, if you're able to pull in with your legs, then you can go back to the sort of area of adjusting the triangle. 2 wrists, 1 and 1, 2 legs, lock on the back of their head, and finish. So those are a couple of the ideas involved with the triangle, and especially the adjusting of a triangle. When it comes time to finish, I've sort of made reference to putting the lock of the triangle on the back of their head. And I haven't really talked about what type of, let's say, squeeze you want to use to finish. Generally, the cues that are given are bring your knees together, pull their head down, and lift your hips up. So the idea is something like, well, it's time to finish a triangle, everyone. And so what we do is we're going to squeeze our knees together, and we're going to pull their head down, and we're going to lift our hips up. And if you've done that, it's probably worked a handful of times, and sometimes it doesn't work as cleanly as it might seem it should. What you want to think about what those cues are trying to do is, if I have a triangle here, like this, and I squeeze my knees together, is it really my knees squeezing that's making the difference? Or do you notice something here with my calf? When I squeeze my knees together, it tends to encourage that calf to turn out to the side and help me create that figure 4 position. If I'm like this with a triangle and my knees squeeze by themselves, it's not going to do a whole lot. It's when I can squeeze my knees and get my calves pointing in the same direction. Now, the reason I point that out is because it's not these weak inner thigh muscles that really do anything useful in a triangle. They're basically irrelevant. Squeezing your legs like you're on a, what is that, thigh master? You guys know, just let me know in the chat, whatever that's called. Where you squeeze it, that's not what's going to give you the mechanical strength to do this. What you're really trying to do is line your legs up so that you can use the motion of bicycling like this. Okay, this is the really powerful movement. When I've got a triangle locked, what I'm doing is I'm extending one leg and I'm pulling the other leg. So one leg pulls and the other extends. It doesn't look like that when you see a triangle because my legs are connected to each other. But one leg is pushing and one is pulling, like this. So we're trying to create a sort of cycling action, not a Jane Fonda action. Okay, we lock the triangle and we bring one leg forward through extension. We bring the other knee inward and retract it. And you'll see that always moves that lock of the triangle towards the back of the head. Okay, so when you are adjusting your triangle, or sorry, when you're done adjusting your triangle, you've put the lock on the back of the head and you're actually finishing. What you're trying to do is extend the strangle leg and retract the support leg so that it's like a pair of scissors or like legs on a bicycle where they shear very close to each other in opposite directions. Okay, the strangle leg will go towards their neck and the support leg will pull in towards your chest. If you do that by itself, you'll finish people without using your hands. But because you're going to run into resistance, what you want to avoid is this. If I've got this idea in mind, I've got, okay, I'm going to extend with one and I'm going to retract with the other. That makes sense. But if I just do that in isolation and they're resisting, what will happen is the triangle will get pulled away from you. So you end up using grips, sometimes a false grip over your shin, sometimes a scoop grip into the legs, so that if they pull away, they go up, they go down, they go forward and backward in time. It doesn't matter, you're attached to them and they're going to go along for the ride. Okay, so think of your grips when you finish as not necessarily amplifying the strangle power, but attaching you to them so that wherever they go, you're going along for the ride. And that shearing action of your legs will do all the strangling you need. Okay, so let's have a look at that sort of, if I don't have grips, and I do have grips, and how my legs will play out here. Okay? So if I'm kneeling here and I've already made my way through, we've done all this good work to get to basically the finishing point. Can we scoot back just there? To this point here, and I've got my triangle locked up and I'm ready to go. I extend with one leg and I retract with the other, and with no resistance I could get the finish right there. But if M does start resisting me, go ahead and get up. Take your time, go whatever you want, go ahead and get up. Eventually it will come apart. Okay? So what I want to do is I take one hand and wrist and I hold my shin, take my other, and I scoop to her arm, or better to her leg. Now, watch what happens when she goes to get out. Just watch how I move with her. Okay? So it wasn't so much that my grip stopped her from moving. Okay? I'm not trying to stop her from moving. What I'm trying to do is I'm attached to her. What I don't want is she starts moving and slowly starts peeling away from me. Instead, I want it to be, okay, we're attached, she starts moving around, and I'm just going along for the ride. And no matter where she moves, she could fall to her back, she could go forward. I'm going to stay attached to her, and we will end up moving together in a way where the strangle can take effect. Again, just one more statement on that. We use scoop grips in the legs or sometimes in the arms. We use hand and wrist over the shin to stay attached to the other person so that the triangle can take effect. It's not necessarily to stop them from doing whatever they're doing. Another way to phrase this, you've probably had someone in a triangle and they just went absolutely berserk and were scrambling around for dear life. And sometimes they roll themselves over and now you have them in a mount triangle. That happens. what essentially you're trying to do is say, hey, if you go in the direction of me getting to a mount triangle, I'll go along for the ride. Okay, you roll over, I'll be right on top, ready to go. Sometimes people will try to stack you and then try to posture and then totally collapse down to their knees and get finished. And all you're trying to do is say, okay, you want to go up, you want to go to the side, I'm just staying attached to you. And when you burn yourself out a little bit, then the finish is there. So once the figure four is locked, okay, so you've gotten threatened and you've gone to lock, and now we've gone to angle, and it's time to finish, all you need to do is stay attached to them and you're going to be fine. There are a few other odds and ends in here that can be useful to look at. So a few things that are coming to mind right now is there are very closely related submissions to the triangle. There are 3/4 arm locks where you have somebody in a trap triangle and you end up finishing them with an arm lock. There are kimuras that can be done to the arm in the triangle and out of the triangle. Those are also useful. There are attacks that go from the upper body like the triangle, you hit resistance, and you go to the lower body with things like X guard or different forms of leg attack. Those are good to know. But we're not going to go into those at all today. I mentioned this in one of the previous lessons. We need to have this sort of assumption between us where if a trap triangle occurs, there's an assumption that it's going to get finished. Okay, and if it doesn't get finished, it's because of one of maybe 4 or 5 reasons. And those 4 or 5 reasons are all fairly easy to deal with if the threat of the triangle itself is legitimate. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But this is sort of real-time instance of it can be tempting to go in the direction of multiple other techniques, but that's only useful when the primary technique, the triangle, is actually solid and in your bones and you can do it reliably. If the triangle is failing and it's failing for 9 or 10 different reasons, or you have trouble keeping track of those reasons, try to avoid looking for other techniques to add on. Spend more time with the triangle and developing it and studying it. I'd be willing to bet that about half of those problems will naturally get pared away, and the remaining ones are actually pretty simple to deal with when you have a strong threat of a triangle. So let me give an example of what I'm talking about, and then we'll sort of move on. So let's say that I'm here with them, and let's do this right here. We've got a trap triangle set. Now, Em knows my whole strategy for triangles, so she takes her left and she blocks my bicep here to make it hard for me to reach to her head. She starts standing up to posture away from me. And now she starts lifting her head up, and as she gets her head up, she goes in thumb post to the back of my knee. She slips her body out of this, and she's gone. Okay? So when this happens, let's say, Em goes to do the same thing. She blocks my arm. She starts standing up to posture. And there is a great way to move to a scoop grip here, so that as Em starts to thumb post away from my leg, I can keep going, go into something like an X guard. Now, in that sort of slow motion example, it was pretty easy for me to do. But what tends to happen is people will get to this kind of position and they go, I remember it was that video online where they scoop the leg and then they go to X guard. And the moment they get even the slightest hint that the thumb post is coming, they start going to X guard. This leg gets thrown across their body and they get nothing. Okay? If instead I was here and Em does the exact same defense, and I commit to my knees raising and pulling in with the legs, and I say, Em, can you get out of this? Now, when I make my transition, notice how much more she had to move her own head away before she was ever free. There's my X guard hook. There's my second X guard hook, and I'm ready to go. So this is an example of this notion of your partner defends to the minimum extent necessary to break your offense. Okay, let's just make up some numbers real quick. Let's say I put forward 90 units of triangle power. Okay, and you have the potential of 100 units of triangle defense. You don't necessarily want to use 100 units of triangle defense against 90 units of triangle offense. You use 90 or 91 maybe. Because if you go beyond that and you go 92 units of triangle defense, you create much more exposure to follow-up attacks. Okay, one of the key things in jiu-jitsu is your technique is never going to be perfect. Okay, what it needs to be is good enough to solve the problem they put in front of you. It can't be any worse than that, but it doesn't need to be any better than that. And often trying to make the technique better than the problem they gave you creates more exposure than you actually needed. If you go to sweep somebody and they just fall over because they have no idea what they're doing, you sweep them, you get up, you go about doing what you're going to do. You don't add a barambolo into that just because you have that much potential attacking power. It's always the minimum amount necessary to get the thing done, but no less. Okay? And in a triangle, a lot of times when follow-ups start getting taught, arm locks, omoplatas, leg attacks, all this kind of thing, the primary attack, the triangle, sort of fades away in priority because people want to do the fancy attack. Commit to finishing the triangle, and when they commit to defending and escaping, then the follow-up will be appropriate. But oftentimes, somebody will already have in their mind sort of this notion of, well, my legs are kind of short, triangles aren't for me, or this is not my good side, so this triangle is not for me, and that sort of thing will really put a hard cap and limit on how much you can gain from a triangle. And the truth is, I've trained with a lot of people of all kinds of body types and experiences, and one thing about people that are very good at black belt and beyond is they all have an amazing triangle. One person who has an absolutely incredible triangle that you'll almost never hear about or see him do, except in rare instances, Marcelo Garcia. He's one of the best triangles that you'll ever encounter. But if I asked 10 black belts to name 10 different things he does well, I don't think that would even be on the list. Okay, so just to put that into a little bit of perspective, the triangle is one of those fundamental things that is almost so fundamental that we just stop talking about it and people get bored of it. But you can only get bored of it once you're good with it. And even then, it just gets more interesting. So we've looked at a whole bunch of stuff with regards to the triangle today. We looked at, this idea, can you stand, that we can come in with our initial setup that we use to get our open guard started, where we can grab sleeves, put a distance foot, put a second distance foot, and then start breaking grips. And if they have no grip after the end of that sequence, we can go up and we can create as much height as possible so that we can circle and straighten the legs and get this nice strong bite with the two knees. Once we've got those two knees in place, we've got a threat of a triangle. We want to go into a figure 4 lock. So we pull in with 2 legs and we use 2 wrists behind the head. From 2 wrists, we go 1 and 1, 1 shin and 1 wrist staying at the head. I use the 1 and 1 to create whatever adjustments I need to start putting the lock of the triangle on the back of the head. Then we go to an angle. That might involve me getting a scoop grip down here at the legs until I can get to a position where my 2 calves line up, and then we can finish. When I finish, I'm keeping myself attached to my partner, and I'm extending the strangle leg and retracting the support leg. So the support leg here is going to retract, and the strangle leg here is going to extend. And all told together, they don't really move at all. Okay. We sort of looked at some of the surrounding ideas around that about a frame triangle versus a folding triangle, some of the defensive measures that your partner will take, whether that be stacking you head over head, whether that be posturing up and away, and how you can deal with that. And then I just sort of hinted at some of the additional follow-ups that happen when all of this stuff is done well and they're still defending, they're still able to put some sort of resistance in front of you. There are some reasonable follow-ups, but we're not going to get into those today. A couple or 1 or 2 drills that I recommend doing that are pretty simple to get started with, but actually can help train you to a pretty high level with the triangle. Can I go right here, please? On our knees. One of my favorites has got to be here, where Anne will grab my wrists and I'll grab her wrists. What I'm looking to do is just bring my feet over my head, and first of all, I should just get comfortable in this kind of position where I've got a knee on either side of my ears, never letting my knee stay on one side or the other of my center line. So we lock up at the... Yeah. So I've got my wrists and her wrists locked together. I bring my feet up and I place my feet into her armpits here. And I just want to be comfortable in this position. Now what I'm looking to do is to take one leg over towards the other. So I've got a first leg, it goes in. I've got a second leg and it leaves. I'm going to turn my body and pull our wrists so that I can bring my knee past her ear and bite. And then my other knee locks in and I pull. Our wrists are still connected. she starts moving away and I unlock. I can bring myself right back in and we can do the drill again. So on the same side, that would just be, I've got one leg, it moves towards the other. My second leg leaves. I use the tension of our grips pulling against each other to turn my body and send my knee up past and around her neck. Once my legs lock, I can pull in with two knees. Our wrists are still joined together, and we can use that to get comfortable tying and untying our limbs. Okay? I recommend that. It's just a very, very approachable coordination drill. And what's going on there, just as a couple cues, the grips are there to help you sense where the other person is. I recommend doing that drill and then doing that drill with your eyes closed. You want to be able to know where the person's entire body is based on contact with their wrist. Okay, if I have a hold of someone's wrist like this, their head can only be in a few limited number of places. And then it helps you get comfortable with your body in an inverted position. In an inverted position, okay? Once you're comfortable in that kind of position, you can start bringing your legs into purposeful locations and aiming your knees past their ears and then bringing them in to triangles. That's probably one of the better drills to do for triangles. It's not a setup you're going to use all the time in sparring, but it's going to help smooth out a lot of the difficult areas of a triangle, which is to say being comfortable being inverted, being comfortable turning your body by using the tension of somebody else's grip, and then once you've gotten into a trap triangle, recognizing that moment, bringing them in with legs and continuing the attack. So that's probably one of the better partner drills to do. Just as a solo drill, you know, getting comfortable just with this hip turnover. We're going to return back to this movement in the future. For now, we're just using it to sort of understand and illustrate this idea of a figure four lock, which again is this odd shape here. If looked down from the top, sort of has a four shape to it. But later on, we'll use this to do things like come up to our shins and create some dexterity in the lower body and things like this. And so that's kind of the initial look at the triangle itself. We'll be getting back into a little bit more of a generalized open guard in the coming lessons and some tie-ins to escapes. And then probably change gears a little bit and go into guard passing, which will help sort of flesh out this whole picture of playing guard and passing guard.